Hey everybody, Gromless here with another Star Citizen video. Today I will take a look at some basics of space combat in Star Citizen. Now, Star Citizen as a whole is coming along nicely, performance of the game is increasing constantly, and with the mini-PU there is more and more to do in it. Also, with the introduction of IFCS 2.0 in Alpha 2.0, the handling of the ships has improved and fighting in the game is even more fun than it in my opinion already was. Anyway, with those progress more and more people become interested in the game and decide to give it a try. And while in the finished game or even just more advanced stages of the alpha there should be many possible non-combat related activities to engage in, like trading, mining, exploring and the like, at the moment everything is still focused very much on space dogfights. Now, since space simulations are however just recently coming back on the scene with games like Star Citizen Elite and others, and maneuvering and fighting in planes in the atmosphere of Earth works quite differently, fighting and maneuvering in Star Citizen can be a bit of a new experience to new players. So I figured I make a little introduction to space combat in Star Citizen, a first part of what I hope will eventually become a series of tutorial videos. Now, what I would like to cover in this first one are the basics of maneuvering your ship in Star Citizen and in space combat. And take a look at how ships in Star Citizen fly and what that means for you, explain the different flight modes and flight assists you can use, and some basic hints and tips for space combat. So before we go into some detail, let me give you a quick explanation of how ships in Star Citizen fly. Now, space sim games in the past traditionally used very simple flight mechanics that try to simulate the behavior of planes in the atmosphere in a very arcadish way. You won't find this in Star Citizen, however. While the fights are very action-laden and close range, the flight model of the ships is quite complex and realistic. For a ship to accelerate or maneuver in any way, the thrusters of the ship need to fire in the appropriate way to make this happen. If you reach the desired speed, the thrusters turn off, and if you want to slow down again, the thrusters need to stop you again. And that leads to some interesting way of how you fight in space, compared to the traditional dogfights you would find in World War II simulations, for example. A difference that I think is quite nice, as it provides a very different experience than flight sims, instead of just trying to poorly imitate them like older space games have done. The ship's thrusters are controlled by the ship's computer to fire them in the appropriate way to implement your control inputs. There are different flight modes that will do that in different ways. Well then, let's hop into free flight and look at what you have to keep in mind when maneuvering in space and what the different flight modes like coupled and decoupled do. But one thing I want to mention really quick first, there's three main flight modes: precision, space combat maneuvering and cruise. You can switch between them with the V key. Their use is mostly self-explanatory. Precision mode reduces the top speed the flight computer will let you get up to 50 meters per second, as well as reduce your acceleration, so that it is easier to maneuver the ship in tight quarters like on landing or on takeoff. Space combat maneuvering, or SCM, is the standard mode and lets you go faster, and you of course have full acceleration. This is the mode we will be primarily concerned about in this video. After that you have cruise mode. This mode is primarily for traveling, though can also be used to get out of tight spots in combat. It increases the maximum speed the computer lets you achieve by a factor of about 4, but your maneuverability is greatly reduced, so you're basically flying in a straight line. But as I have said, for this space combat we're primarily concerned with the SCM, or Space Combat Maneuvering mode. So, since there is no atmosphere in space to slow you down, you can see that when I accelerate, the main thruster in the rear only fires for a short time, till I reach my top speed, and then turns off. And when I put the throttle to 0 again, the thrusters in the front fire to slow the ship down till it is stopped. One obvious thing to consider here, the main thruster has more power than the maneuvering ones, so you will always accelerate faster in the direction your nose is pointing. Slowing down takes longer than getting up to speed, and as a result, the fastest way to change the direction you are flying in is flip the ship around 180 degrees and accelerate in the opposite direction. Having lots of maneuvering thrusters on your ship also gives you a few more control axes to play with. Since you can apply sideways thrust as well as up and down thrust, you can strafe sideways or up and down, which you can combine with your normal control inputs for some nice maneuvering. Now, the top speed of the ship is, by the way, in the game's lore, a safety measure and connected to the ship's acceleration. The computer won't let you go above a certain speed if it would take you too long to stop the ship. Now, in the standard flight mode, the ship will always try to fly in the direction you're pointing your nose at the speed you have selected. So if you have your throttle at 100%, the computer will fire the thrusters till you reach your top speed in that direction, and at the same time kill a movement in any other direction as fast as he can. So When you fly at your top speed and you do a 90-degree turn, your main thruster will immediately start to fire as soon as your nose is starting to point in a new direction to accelerate you in a new direction, and at the same time the maneuvering thrusters will start to work on killing your momentum in the initial direction. Since, as we have established, the maneuvering thrusters aren't as strong as the main ones, that can take them a bit, and that means you will start to slide in a turn. As you can see, if I turn after passing the asteroid, I can easily drift around it. This is not me using any kind of strafing key, just the main thrusters pushing me in that direction as I turned and the maneuvering thrusters needing a bit of time to kill that momentum. This little specialty of flying in space is quite an important factor in space combat. You can use it to your advantage to be a harder to hit target and to quickly get some cover between you and your target, but it also needs to be taken into account when flying, for example, inside an asteroid field. You have to keep in mind that you're almost always going sideways. Because of that, one thing that becomes very important when fighting and maneuvering in tight quarters like an asteroid belt is boost. Now, boost is pretty much an afterburner for your thrusters. It increases the acceleration and uses up fuel while doing so. Shift is the standard key for it. The increased acceleration of your thrusters means that they get you up to top speed faster, increases your maneuverability, and reduces sliding, as the more powerful thrusters now can stop the momentum faster. However, using boost also turns off G-safe mode, as long as you use it. G-safe is one of the flight assists you can see in the lower right corner of the HUD, and as the name would suggest, it keeps you from pulling too many G and make your pilot pass out. You can turn it off manually as well, but at the moment the ships hardly pull enough G to make the pilot pass out if you don't use boost. If you do, however, you have to be careful, as it is usually a bad thing to lose all control of your ship in the middle of a fight. Now, boost has two modes. Just pressing shift increases the acceleration, as you just saw, but your top speed stays the same, and double tapping it increases your top speed, like a normal afterburner. Another flight assist you can see below G-safe is com step. This is basically a slip control and reduces sliding a bit, but also your maneuverability. It is generally not a good idea to have this on in combat, as the sideways movement makes you a more difficult target for others. So, with those two out of the way, let's talk about the really interesting one, the one all the way on the top that says coupled. Now, coupled mode is the standard flight mode we are in, and as we have seen, in this mode the computer always tries to make you fly in the direction your nose is pointing and kill all other momentum. So, if I fly around those landing pads, you see, if I fly past them, as soon as I turn around, the main thruster starts firing, as my nose is pointed in a different direction, and the maneuvering thrusters stop the movement in the other direction, and I come around the other side of the landing pad and fly back where I came from. So far, so logical. You can, however, turn this coupled mode off and enter decoupled mode, as it is called. As soon as you do so, the computer will no longer try to push you in the direction your nose is pointing or kill the momentum you already have. It will, however, still let you maneuver and influence your flight path using the strafe function to influence your flight vector. For example, if you fly forward and decouple, you will keep flying this direction, even if you turn around. If you now strafe down a bit, this downwards momentum will be added to your original forward vector, and you fly diagonally down and forward while facing in whatever direction you want. Now, there are quite a few uses for this mode, as you can imagine. Let's take a look at a few. First of all, it is obviously possible this way to flip around your ship and fire at an attacker behind you while still flying away from him. Something you can use when you want to keep some separation, because you determined that you are in a situation where you have better chances at longer ranges than close-in knife fights. Keep in mind though that as long as you fly straight, backwards or forwards, you're easy to hit, so you always want to try to have some sideways movement added. Now, another thing is maneuvering and turning around in tight quarters. In normal coupled mode, as we have seen, the main thruster will fire as soon as you start turning, giving your turn a bit of a U-shape, like a turn of an airplane. Now, in tight quarters that can be bad. Let's say, for example, I fly through this gap in the big asteroid and I want to flip my ship around because I notice someone is behind me. In normal mode, as soon as I pull up, my main thrusters fire and push me into the asteroid. Now, in this case I could have just turned into another direction, but this is just an example. Well, let's take a look at it with the use of decoupled mode instead. We again have a large gap in a broken up asteroid I fly through. Now, if I switch to decoupled mode first and spin around, my main thrusters won't fire. The computer will only fire the maneuvering thrusters in such a way that I can spin the ship around without influencing my flight vector. So as long as I'm pointing to open space when I start, I can flip around and know I won't hit anything. Now, with all that drifting around, there's one very important tool I want to show you to help you maneuver in both coupled and decoupled mode. the flight path vector indication. This is this little gadget here, a rounded square with an arrow at the bottom. Now, people that played simulators with modern planes or are pilots will know what this is, but if you don't have any experience like that or only World War II simulations, you might not know what this thing is. As a matter of fact, I think that even many experienced Star Citizen players aren't aware of it. Even though this is one of the most important tools in your HUD when you fly in decoupled mode, and also in coupled often useful. And it does exactly what the name suggests. It shows you your current flight path vector, meaning it shows you in which direction your ship is currently flying, which, as we have established, does not have to be where your nose is pointing. Not even coupled, and most certainly not in decoupled. The arrow in the bottom shows you if you go forward or backward, arrow pointing down, meaning you go backwards, and pointing up, forwards. Now, there are many uses for this. First of all, it shows you if there is anything in the way of your actual flight path. If you chase an enemy ship through an asteroid field and there is a small asteroid showing up in front of you and the vector indicator points directly at it, you might want to do something about that. Also, it helps you a lot when maneuvering in decoupled mode, as with all the different momentum you can combine, it can be sometimes hard to determine in which direction you are actually going. With the flight path vector, however, you can maneuver pretty precise in decoupled mode, just by using your maneuvering thrusters to strafe and influence the flight path. For example, you can maneuver easily through caves in an asteroid without even touching your main flight controls, just changing your vector with the strafe keys and move your vector indicator to where you want to go. This way, it is often safer to fly through tight quarters in decoupled mode, since the computer isn't trying to push you in the direction of your crosshair and leading to sliding when maneuvering as a result. Another useful application for both decoupled mode and flight path vector indication is a nice landing. Now, landing in Star Citizen is not particularly difficult, but what does often give new players problems is to actually make it look like they know what they are doing and get a nice landing in one smooth move, not strafing up and down 10 times before setting down. And after all, if you want to land in front of your friends showing off your brand new fighter, you don't want to look like a total beginner doing it. Now, the basics of that are pretty simple. You just approach the landing pad, slow down a bit, and go into decoupled mode. With the down strafe, you add some downwards momentum to descend to the pad, and then you slow down your forward and downward momentum as you approach, and keep the vector indicator to where you want it, until you are above the landing pad, and then you can just drift down as soon as the gear is down. And with that, we're done with the basic maneuvering in Star Citizen. I hope to add some more advanced stuff later on. Now, a few more things I would like to add for new players. A few words on weapons, some basic tips for fighting in Star Citizen, and how to get better ships and weapons by playing the game. Now, one thing I want to mention at the beginning is, if you fight in Star Citizen, you always want to move. A stationary target is easy to hit and to destroy. The same goes for head-ons, where you have no transversal velocity to the side. You want to avoid that, especially in smaller ships, as you can get hit easily that way also. When fighting a larger and better armed ship, try to get some hits in and then dodge out of his way and don't fly straight at his face without sidewards motion. Now, a word on weapons. Weapons are a topic I will also cover in more detail in an own video later, though that might still be a while since I would like a few more balancing passes and more weapons added to the game first. But some basics. First of all, weapons in Star Citizen come in different sizes. We have size 1 through 4 in the game now, but that will go up more as we get bigger ships. And guns in Star Citizen can be fixed or gimbaled, like mini-turrets. The way this works is, if your ship has, say, a size 3 gun slot on a wing, you can fit weapons from size 1 to 3 into it, size 3 being the largest possible. If you do that, they will be fixed and forward firing. If you want them to be gimbaled, you have to fit a gimbal mount first, which reduces the maximum size of the weapon by 1, so you can now only fit a size 2 weapon. For example, I have 4 size 2 mounts in the wings of this Mustang Delta, and size 2 laser repeaters and sledge mast drivers fitted there. Since size 2 is the maximum weapon size, the weapons are fixed, which is what I prefer anyway. If I would want them to be gimbaled, I would have to fit gimbals on those slots, and then I could fit only size 1 weapons on those slots. Now, as for aiming, you can see I have 2 lag pips, meaning predicted impact points. You can also switch to lead pips, which is what older space games traditionally used, if you prefer. Now, you can see that I have 2 different pips, a little bit apart. That is because my weapons have slightly different projectile velocity, and therefore the predicted impact point of those does not overlap. In this case, they are still pretty close together though, as the projectile velocity is still pretty similar. If the velocity difference is larger, then they can be pretty far apart, and then you won't be able to hit with both weapons unless the target is stationary or very large. Now, there are different ways of dealing with that. One being to simply fit weapons that have similar projectile velocities, and some say that is the only viable way. I disagree though. As the game progresses further, I see many options here. For example, if you have a ship fitted with a powerful shield and 4 powerful weapons, maybe you don't have the power to use everything at the same time, in which case you could split your weapons into 2 groups, one being powerful anti-fighter weapons and the other powerful anti-capital ship weapons, and then use either one or the other as needed. Just as one example, but we will see how things turn out as the game develops further. At the moment, balancing is still too early to say much about that. Now, there are also missiles in game. Their use is pretty simple. Clicking the fire button once locks them on target, and then keeping it pressed fires them. Missiles come with different seeker heads, like infrared or radar guidance, and you have flares and chaff as defense. Also important for missiles is the signature of your ship. In the lower left and right you can see readouts for my IR and EM signature. Missiles using those to track will be more dangerous the higher the signature is above the ambient signature. So this is a basic overview of the weapons. Now, one thing that might also be interesting to new players to know is how to get better ships in Star Citizen at the moment by playing the game. Now, if you have the basic starter pack, you probably have either a Mustang Alpha or this Aurora MR starter ship, which has weak shields and weapons and isn't very fast or maneuverable. And while you can take it into combat against the mostly fully upgraded Super Hornet fighters you will meet in Arena Commander, the little ship isn't doing so great. It has other strong points. Luckily, by playing the game you can earn so-called REC for doing damage, which you can use on the website to rent better ships and weapons. And weaker ships get a bonus, so they earn more for the same damage done. One way to earn those is by fly races, but this is a combat guide. Now, if you don't mind being the underdog, you can simply take your Aurora into normal Battle Royale and Squadron battles and earn some REC there. Otherwise, you can go into co-op Vandal Swarm NPC battles. They are currently very easy and can be completed very fast, especially since they are co-op, so you aren't alone. With 1 or 2 good runs you can get a stronger Aurora LN and earn more with that, and move up from there. Currently you can also use those ships in the mini PU, but later down the PU and the Arena Commander will be independent. Arena Commander in the game's lore is a computer simulation which you play in your sim pod in your hangar, to fight and train without risking your actual ship in the real universe, and you can use the REC you earn in those simulations to rent virtual spaceships. The real ones you buy with UEC, the proper currency in-game, which you earn in the persistent universe as soon as this is available. So, and with this little bit of info we are coming to the end of this tutorial. I hope it was informative, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.